Hey, Miles here at Tactical Hyve, and today I want to talk to you about slapping your trigger on your firearm, whether it's a rifle or pistol, primarily pistol for today in this particular video. And if you don't know what I'm referring to when your trigger is at rest right here and you're going to use your trigger finger just to slap the trigger, squeeze it, and the shot's going to go off. You're going to hear different schools of thought. Some are going to say that is completely wrong, that is going to lend itself for you shanking your shot and basically missing your target. And it's right, and it's also wrong. A lot of it deals with context, and basically anything, any topic in the firearms industry, context is so important, where a lot of people argue, but they may not be arguing from the same place, may not be comparing apples to apples. So when we talk about slapping the trigger, there is a time and place for it. And if you do it correctly and follow certain principles when it comes to trigger control, you can do so successfully. So let's talk about when you may use slapping, right? So if you didn't know, there are 4 types of trigger manipulations, well, at least that I know of. Most people only know about 1 or 2. So there is slapping, which I just talked about. There is rolling. There is the reset and prep and staging. And so what we're going to talk about right now is slapping. We won't talk about the other 3. Slapping is something where, as I mentioned, a lot of people are like, don't do that. That's not the right way to do it. But here's the truth. Shooting, you may have heard, is extremely simple. Not necessarily easy, but simple. All you need to do is line up your sights or your red dot, put it on the target, and squeeze the trigger, pull, press, whatever you want to call it, without disrupting the sights. And wherever your red dot was or your iron sights, you're going to hit that shot. Unfortunately, if you've been shooting for a while or you're a beginner, you know it's not that simple, right? Or you know it's not that easy. You understand the concept, but when you do it, you might not be hitting your target. And so some of you might be slapping the trigger, but you don't know the principles behind a proper trigger squeeze, even if you were slapping. So we're going to get to that. Right now, let's talk about the different situations you might use slapping. So going back to how people say, no, don't ever slap the trigger, you're going to jerk. When you think about somebody popping out of nowhere, we do a lot of force and force classes. And it's even happened to people who are not in the scenario in a force and force class. They may be walking around and they pop up in front of a student, they're just an observer, and they get shot, where a student gets so nervous and they just slap the trigger and then shoot somebody, whether it's a role player or someone just observing. And slapping is going to be something you just default to if you were completely surprised and things are up close, happening super fast. There's a lot of people who say, who wonder, okay, will you see your sights in an actual firefight or gunfight? The truth is, it's a trick question because it depends. It depends on the situation. If someone were to pop out of nowhere right now, attack me with a knife, and I'm not going to have any time to see my sights, right? But now let's take an extreme example where somebody might be 100, 200 yards away. I have time to focus on my sights and take an accurate and or precise shot. So same thing with slapping here. Slapping is where your finger's at rest, as you can see right here, maybe on the frame, and then all you're going to do is just squeeze that trigger because you need to. The context or the situation is calling for it. So you can slap the trigger as long as you follow proper trigger control principles. And that is why a lot of people miss. They might not know the principles, or maybe they know it, but they haven't practiced it enough to build that or ingrain it in their subconscious. So it's not natural for them. So when you are surprised, you can squeeze that trigger, and it is what you're naturally going to default to. But now let's talk about the principles that are going to help you do that successfully. So the first principle in any type of trigger manipulation is to only move your trigger finger. That sounds, again, simple, but not necessarily easy. So you've probably seen some of my other videos where I talk about how if you move more than just your trigger finger, what's going to happen is, I'm going to point this pistol at you, it's dry here, okay? What's going to happen here is if I move my 3 amigos or anticipate the shot, what happens is I tend to go low and left. That's typical for a right-handed shooter. You're going to shoot low and to the left. For a left-handed shooter, you're going to shoot low and to the right. And that is because we are moving more than just our trigger finger. So if you learn that first principle and you really ingrain it in your mind, just move the trigger finger, that is going to help you out. Just remember though, it is not that easy. It takes training for people just to do this. If it were that easy, everyone will be able to shoot very, very well. Unfortunately, we tend to tense up, and that is going to force us to move the sights of the gun at the last second. So that is the first principle. You need to work on just moving your trigger finger. There are a few different exercises that you can do to work on that, and also to validate that you can actually hit your shot if you're just moving your trigger finger. And I'll link to one of the videos that I created about that somewhere here and even in the description below. So that is the first thing, just move your trigger finger. Also, it helps just to mentally think about that when you're taking the shot. Don't think about the target, just tell yourself, okay, just move the trigger finger, just move the trigger finger, and that should help out as well. The second principle, the proper trigger control, that is going to allow you to slap that trigger without any issues in your accuracy, is to pull, squeeze, press, whatever you want to call it, your trigger straight to the rear. Okay, so if you were my target and I'm going to take a shot at you, my trigger finger is, the motion is similar to me going come here, or I'm trying to touch my nose, straight back, straight back. And if you do that, then you're going to also help alleviate, or I should say, decrease the chances of you moving that gun, because you're just moving the trigger finger straight to the rear. This is a principle that applies to any firearm. The reason why this is so important is because your trigger finger, depending on how you move it, you can either push the gun here or pull it to the right. It depends on the movement of your trigger finger. So that is principle number 2. Combine the second principle with the first, which is just to move your trigger finger, and you're already halfway there in terms of being successful with the slapping technique. The third principle that is going to help you out if you do find yourself in a situation where you have to slap the trigger is to combine the first 2 principles with these next 2, or the third and fourth principle, and the third one is to use minimal effort when pulling the trigger. What do I mean by that? So if my trigger weight, okay, if it takes about 6 pounds to break this trigger, right? I don't want to use 20 pounds, okay, I'm exaggerating here, because if it only takes 6 and I put 20 pounds of pressure, there's a chance that I might disrupt the sights, okay? I might, right? So I might move my gun to the left, to the right, down, or who knows, even up. So you only want to use the necessary amount of weight to break your shot. So if you had a 6-pound trigger, then really you only need 6.0001 pounds, right, to break that trigger. And that is going to give you the best chance of being successful at slapping without any major issues. Now, of course, as I talked about, when you are nervous, right, who knows, maybe something pops out, you might really slap it with a lot of energy. And that's okay, because these principles, they kind of layer, they're insurance policies. So if you do number 1 and number 2, just move your trigger finger and move it straight to the rear, then if you do successfully do that, then putting more force is not going to be the end of the world, because you can still rely on principle 1 and 2. But now if you can combine principle 1, 2, and 3, then you're going to even be in a better situation. Principle number 4 is to use constant speed. What that means is when you are squeezing your trigger here, if you start at, I'm just going to make up a number here, 10 miles per hour, okay? Then you're going to continue your pull at 10 miles per hour. Don't start at 10, then go down to 2 miles per hour, then you increase to 100 miles per hour. Every time you change your speed, there's a chance, again, you might jolt the gun somewhere. Okay? So it's similar to using minimal effort. The more force we put or exert, there's a chance that we might mess up and forget principles 1 and 2, and then we're going to disrupt the sights of the gun or the red dot. So again, all these are layers. It's kind of like an insurance policy. Number 1 and number 2, okay, are going to really be your fallback. So if you do number 1 and 2, you should be successful. But if you do all 4 of them, then you should be very accurate and very precise. So is slapping wrong? No, it's not. It just really depends on the context, what is happening to you, and if you follow all 4 of the principles, which apply, to be honest, to all the trigger manipulations out there. If you follow all 4 principles, then whatever you're aiming at, you're going to have the best chance of not disrupting your sights and landing your shots on target. So for those of you who've been wondering about slapping, if it's good or bad, there you guys have it. There's a time and place for that, and you might be forced in a situation where you are going to slap the trigger. But now you know the principles to execute properly so that you'll be accurate and precise. I hope you guys liked the video. If you have any comments about slapping the trigger, I'd love to hear what you have to say, and we'll see you guys in the next video.